Hello and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast where we inspire fathers to build the blueprint for the next generation. We're the Thomas brothers, and I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jared. And today we're talking about the couple different attributes. We've kind of both come with a loose interpretation of what this is, and we've kind of come at it from different angles. But I'm calling it the legacy, heritage, and tradition episode. So we're going to talk about kind of all of those things, uh, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the great, and just about all that, and how we can start good traditions for our families, and then maybe if there's any traditions that we want to cast off that we don't like. And so it's gonna be a good discussion, and look forward to hearing what you have to say, Ethan.
All right, let's get into it.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so the whenever Jared and I were talking about this, we're like talk about this episode. We kind of just started with a single word, and which was heritage, and we're kind of talking back and forth, and we're like, let's just say heritage and let's see where the episode goes, right? And so it's always kind of interesting how we'll just start with one word and then kind of the direction that Jared and I will go uh is always kind of cool to look at. So I guess first let's just start with a definition of heritage, or at least what I have kind of put together. So heritage is interesting. So it refers to traditions, values, customs, culture, and history that are passed down from previous generations. Uh, I thought this was also interesting. That it said it can include things like property, artifacts, momentum, or monuments, but it can also be maybe more in more aspects intangible, such as language, beliefs, practices.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of shapes a person's community identity and plays a role in preserving that sense of community over an extended period of time. It can be, personal, familial, cultural, you can have, within a company. There's a lot of aspects that play into heritage. And it's kind of cool that you said legacy as well, because that was one thing that popped into my mind, and I'll talk about in a little bit here also, kind of the I guess the differences between heritage and legacy. But that was kind of my definition. What about you, Jared?
No, yeah, I think that it's multifaceted. Like you said, one thing heritage specifically, I think, is something, the way I've seen it defined is that it's something that's yours by reason of birth. So it's your birthright. It's more about your lineage and your genealogy, heritage. Uh, so like, do you have German heritage? Do you have Japanese heritage? Do you have English heritage? Do you have uh, Native American or Mexican or Spanish heritage? Like, what is that race? What is that genealogy? What is that? Uh, so that's kind of what I think more about heritage. It's interesting you mentioned like properties and possessions. I didn't really think about that very much. But what are they? I think with that comes, another step outside of that is like cultural. Like, what are some of the cultural attributes of your heritage? And then when I think about that, kind of goes in with traditions. What are the traditions that are involved there? But also legacy. Like, what kind of legacy do you want to have your forefathers left for you? Is Are they good? Are they something that you want to stand on? I think, well, I was thinking about the title of this episode, and I was thinking um like uh, are like I was thinking something like heritage, legacy, and tradition, uh, shackles of the past, or a podium to start from. And I think that
Yeah.
it's a really kind of good way to view that, because there's many different things. I think something that just popped in my mind at the beginning of this episode was, I don't know if you saw kind of the coronation of the new king after Queen Elizabeth died. Um, that whole thing is filled with tradition, symbolism. I don't really care much because it's a British thing, And obviously, as Americans, we could probably care less about that. But it's very interesting just to see all that tradition, to see all that symbolism. I think like the chair that the king's chair was from like centuries old, and it sat in the in the underground crypt for a while. I mean, I think that that's an example of some of that cultural heritage
Yeah.
that people have. I think there's a stickiness to it to keep that around and to pass that on in many ways. I think from my impression of the folks across the pond is either they love the royal family or they think it's all a waste of money. So I think that that tradition and that legacy of that heritage plays in a big piece there.
Yeah. I think it's definitely true. I kind of, as I was thinking through it, thought of it from like a, I don't know, maybe a macro level down to a micro level. And I kind of broke it into um, kind of three or four different levels. Um, and I'll just kind of go through those levels, and then we can kind of talk through a little bit. But my first level, like the big macro level, was my heritage from God. Right, it was kind of my I guess divine nature, if you will. And I'll tell them first, and then I'll kind of backtrack and go through them. So next one was my heritage of being an American. You kind of mentioned that earlier. The next one is the heritage of being part of the Thomas family.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of got into a little bit of that heritage versus legacy as well. So, from kind of the larger perspective, heritage from God, this just comes from having a belief in, relationship and faith in Jesus Christ. And that divine nature, I guess, in believing that every person is a child of God, is something that is, at least to me, very comforting. We have been given our agency and accountability to make our own choices in our life, and we have an eternal potential to you know either, I guess, succeed or not, depending on choices that we make. So that one was kind of a larger thing, I guess maybe some of the tangible things that are maybe the scriptures or, writings of past prophets and different things like that. Those are all part of a heritage that those who might be religious would feel. Um, and I think I consider myself extremely blessed to be able to partake in those things, right? I think there was, definitely some point in history where the commoner like ourselves didn't have access to some of these uh, uh, legacy products, right? Or these types of heritage documents. Yeah, I think of on a university campus that's been there for 250 years, right? And the main dining hall is Heritage Hall, right? It's something that just where they have all of the, whether it's memorabilia or awards or just kind of cultural feeling of how that is. So that was kind of the high level. Next one was being an American. First thing that came to my mind was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've been given the heritage of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and the government and the structure that we have is something that was not, in my opinion, put together haphazardly. It was very thoughtfully constructed by many different people with many differing opinions, but they agreed and came to a conclusion on one way that it should be. I think also heritage would be remembering the sacrifice of those who have given so much for this country. Whether it was the ultimate sacrifice of their lives or their fortunes or whatever else it might be. Um, I want to, and I'll kick it back over to you in a minute, and then I want to come back to the heritage of being an American, kind of towards the end of our conversation. But the last one was being a part of the Thomas family. I kind of put through uh, my mind what are some maybe traditions or cultural ideals or uh, what are some language or terminology that we use in the Thomas family that was something that other people would be like, what the heck are you talking about? um, but from a cultural perspective, I think that the Thomas family, I think we are hard workers. And I don't think this just comes from our our parents. I think it comes from our parents' parents and that heritage that comes with the culture of our family. Um, I think that we are very capable as a family. I think that we are very good at loving. We are good at serving others and thinking critically, trying to analyze things in the world around us. Also, being leaders to those in any aspect of our lives, whether it's was Boy Scouts growing up, or church, or work, or on the soccer field, or whatever it may be. I think that we come from a line of people look to us for leadership. Um, so I think that's kind of breaking it down to and what is the heritage that I'm going to pass on to my kids. What am I going to keep from past generations and flow into mine? I think um, sometimes you can control those. I think sometimes some of them are kind of unconscious things that we don't really think about. Um, maybe I don't know, maybe aggression or maybe even something like alcoholism, right? Some people are just more susceptible to being alcoholics
Mhm.
than not. And so you're kind of like, well, that's a little bit of the heritage of my family is alcoholism to a certain extent. So I'm going to make sure that I stay away from that because I know how susceptible. I think there's a biological aspect to that as well. Susceptible to something like that. So those are just a couple of my thoughts to start off with heritage.
Yeah, I think that yeah, you mentioned some good ones. I also, have some points on the Thomas family heritage. Um, my viewpoint is, I think that as we look to the past, it's so nuanced, and I think that if we look at the history of the world, history of even our parents' lifetimes, even our lifetimes, we can see things that are good that we want to continue forward with. And then we can see things that we want to cast off and no longer have that tradition. Just like the Americans, right? They wanted to cast off the British crown as a tradition and start their own tradition. Um, I think that that's a quite the legacy of being able to fight for freedom, being able to uh, put your life on the line for your community, to fight for something that you care about. Uh, I think that American tradition is very cool. I think one thing, and we're going to talk about more about that, but I think that one thing that people often don't think about is that you can adopt a heritage. You don't have to start with a heritage. You ask anybody who's been in the Marine Corps, right? They weren't a Marine before they went into the Marine Corps. They went into the Marine Corps, and now they got Semper Fi tattooed on their forearm. And they're like singing in the halls of Moctezuma. These guys are through and through always a Marine. That is the heritage that they've adopted. And so you can align yourself with causes and beliefs and virtue sets that as a heritage that you agree with. Now, or a tradition or a culture that you agree with. Uh, if you really like, for example, one thing I think is a cool heritage is this. we've talked about the Japanese culture sometimes and how they have a culture of being very polite, respectful, this
Clean.
honor, respect. And is it maybe you're saying like, well, I want to adopt some of that culture into mine, or you join something like join a cause. Like I think there's kind of a culture in kind of a jujitsu with the academy that I go to. There's kind of a culture there that you adopt, um, and so that is one cool thing that you can do is you can find uh, traditions to adopt that you like. And I think that in many cases that's the case, and people do that. If not, everybody would be the same generation after generation. And so I think about even my own family specifically. I think about how adopting new traditions has really blessed our family. Um, you know, we just take a look at my dad's side of the family. He was the first one to ever go to college from his side of the family. He was born in the backwoods and literally the woods swamp of South Carolina, and he came out of that. And in a way, he broke that family tradition that had been around for centuries of living kind of in the backwoods. We didn't come from money. He stepped out of that and created a new tradition. And he said, well, his dad didn't go to college. His mom didn't go to college. They just lived in a very, very modest home out in the woods. And so he's like, well, I want to do more than that. And so he went a different path. He broke from tradition to be able to create a better future for his kids than what he had. And so,
Luckily.
yeah, because of hard work and because of his dedication, and obviously mom was a part of that too, and her drive as well. Grandpa and grandma, they didn't go to college. I don't think mom was the first one in her family because I think her brothers and sisters went to college, but uh, definitely amongst her generation in her family. And so we have a lot of, and then mom and dad started this business, the chiropractic business together, and they grew a successful business. And so that breaking from tradition has made all the difference in our lives. And so I think that is a tradition of adapting and overcoming. That is a great attribute to sometimes cast off those things, but to remember those things. Some of the things that I think that dad uh, and even mom in many ways, like with our grandma and grandpa on our mom's side, they're very handy. Our grandma, she would be able to sew anything. And growing up, our mom would sew all kinds of outfits and costumes and all kinds of stuff. And now, it's funny actually. The other day, I got my new blue belt when I went to jujitsu, and part of it was there's like a black part where you can tape your stripes. It was like coming unstitched, and it was about to fall off. And so I was like, okay, I got to fix this. And so I sewed it back. And the other day I was at jujitsu, and a guy who tested he got his blue belt at the same time I did. His same thing was coming off of his blue belt, and he's like, "Oh man, this whole thing's coming off." I said, "Oh yeah, I had that problem," and I showed it. He's like, "Well, how'd you fix it?" I sewed it.
A needle and thread.
I went home and I sewed it, and he's like, "Oh, I think I'm just gonna buy a new one." I'm like, "Just buy a 1 cent thread and sew it, man." And so like that, and then like also I think on our dad's side, like passing on this tradition of like being capable to be able to get in and do things yourself, like this DIY ability, or the ability to learn something and to be able to do that. I think a couple other traditions that were passed down uh, from our dad and mom to us was a love for the outdoors, camping, the ability to be competent in the outdoors, whether that's orienteering or just knowing how to survive in the outdoors. That's something I want to pass on. That's one of the good traditions I want to pass on to my kids. Uh, you talked about hardworking. That's absolutely one, and I think that our dad has modeled that in many ways, and so has our mom, and we kind of grew up in that, and that's a tradition. And so is, or maybe it might not tradition, but kind of like a culture of what we want to do. Also, a tradition of standing up for what is right, even if you stand alone. Uh, it's I feel like that's something that we've always done. And there's been times when, yeah, if you feel truly convicted about something, then you stand up for it, even if that means everyone else is against you. There's also a tradition of service, and I love that, and helping those who need help, and lending a hand when it's needed, and looking for those opportunities to serve. So those are great traditions. Also, another one I wanted to mention was frequent vacations with the kids. We were able to go on frequent vacations,
Yeah.
just small little vacations, weekend vacations here and there as kids. And that was such a great way to bond as a family. Something that my wife didn't really get the chance to, and I think part of it was just because her dad worked so much. But the little vacations that they did go on meant so much, and so that's a kind of a tradition. But we're also building new traditions. One of the new traditions. Oh, also I wanted to mention the tradition of being a responsible gun owner is something that was
Yeah.
passed. And so I appreciate that. And that's something I plan to pass down to my kids. And I think that's almost like an American heritage as well, is the tradition of being a responsible gun owner. And a new tradition I have is being able to defend oneself physically, and through martial arts. And I'm trying to teach the kids that as well, so that they feel like they can hold their own if they're in some type of a situation where they would need to. Uh, I starting a tradition of doing annual getaways with my wife, modeling to my kids that, like, hey, your mom is important, and it's not just about you guys; it's about me and mom's relationship as well. So getting away with my wife at least once a year, just her and I. And then I think that also you can transform some of the different cultures. Like, our dad was really into scuba diving, and it is really into scuba diving. And I think that's pretty cool. Honestly, I think that where I'm at right now, having four little kids, and they're all dependent on my income, I think it's a little bit dangerous. You know, I think it is a dangerous hobby to do scuba diving, but that doesn't necessarily. So maybe it's not for me right now, but I think that it is. I can transform that into exploring other hobbies, and just that exploration, find what I like. And I've done that with other things like metal detecting or gold panning or magnet fishing or crypto investing or jujitsu or a whole slew of other things that I'm able to explore other other avenues, other hobbies that bring joy to my life. And you know, I think that's a great tradition to have.
Yeah. Those are
Was
all great.
I just said a lot, but what are your thoughts? Any thoughts on all that?
No, I like the addition of kind of the heritage of the Thomas family. I think that's good. For me, and that's one of the first things I thought of was, is heritage and tradition, or I mean, is heritage and legacy, is that the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
But as I kind of dug into it, it's more of heritage refers to what you inherit from the past, traditions, values, cultures. Um, Legacy refers to what you leave behind for future generations. And so it's almost if you think of like a timeline, right? And
Yeah.
you're in the middle of the timeline, your heritage is everything that's behind you, and your legacy is everything that's in front of you.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's almost like, your heritage right now was at one point someone else's legacy.
Yeah.
And it was our ancestors' legacy is the heritage that we have right now. And our legacy, what we want to leave behind for future generations, for them is going to be, my legacy is going to be my descendants' heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was kind of a cool
Yeah. It is.
way to look at it. So one thing that I wanted to kind of round back on with heritage, and I think it's important, and I think it's important too to be flexible in a heritage, right? Some aspects of a heritage maybe are not the best, um, and so I actually looked into specifically talking about a country. How does a country lose its heritage, or how does someone lose their heritage?
Mm-hmm.
And so specifically talking about, the United States of America, because I'm American. Um, there's some of these things these touch points that I want to kind of walk through of how a country can lose its heritage and its culture. So the first one, and you can yeah, you can jump in on any of these, but I think a lot of these will sound familiar. So first one is uh, erosion of traditional values, so such as family, faith, patriotism, community. Erosion of those traditional values can cause a loss of heritage. Um, Overemphasis on progressivism, a focus on constant social change and innovation, modernization, and is something that can kind of go away from heritage. A breakdown of the family unit, that is something that is very important when the country itself doesn't support the foundation and the creation of a family and a specific family unit with responsibilities associated. Um, Education. How do I word this one? Education and let's see how they worded it here. Historical revisionism. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like a little bit of a 1984 type thing, or a little bit of, I guess, if we don't like what the history book says, we'll just change it.
Yeah.
Um, Downplaying certain aspects of history and changing it to make other aspects maybe more important or more talked about or more taught is interesting. So, government overreach, obviously, that makes sense. Excessive government control and kind of can undermine cultural practices and traditions. Political correctness and censorship. If you're not able to say what you want to say and how you want to say it, then uh, you're basically hindering the ability for the next generation to learn uh, learn from the past generations. And then the last one was a lack of national pride. So patriotism. All of these
Yeah.
things. Go ahead.
No, you finish it. What you were going to
I
say?
was gonna say, and then well, there was actually one more, and that other one was um, rapid globalization and open borders. Obviously, is one that I think there's definitely cultures that can come in and um, add positively to a community. But sometimes there's cultures that they just come in and eat your pets.
Yeah, I think I agree with the last one, and I agree with maybe one other one. But I feel like what you're saying is like people like our threat to our way of a threat to our heritage and our legacy is just like people doing anything different than what has been done. And like you could the Amish could say, well, the world around us is forgetting all of our, is forgetting their heritage and they're modernizing all this much. And so it's like I don't think modernization is bad at all. If we can adopt how the Japanese run their trains and how clean their subway stations are, why not do that? Why don't we modernize that? I mean, like maybe that's not the modernization that you're talking about, but I think that I mean,
No, I think you're
in
right.
some
That
ways,
that make that makes sense.
like the Amish would say, "Oh, that's not our tradition. Our tradition is horse and buggy." And so I don't think so.
But
In some
is
ways,
that bad? Is it bad for the Amish to, you know, have this heritage and not in our mind progress?
well, I mean, yeah, but that we wouldn't have the if we were all stuck in the Amish world that they were in, we would not be a world superpower. In fact, we probably wouldn't even be the United States.
Yeah.
So they have the luxury of living in a lifestyle that's in the 1850s, while the rest of us are living and innovating so that we can drop a hairpin bomb on the face of some Al Qaeda terrorist who's going to plan to overthrow our government or
But can you
whatever.
but can you but can you progress out of being a world superpower? I mean, eventually the Roman Empire fell
Yeah, I think that yeah,
because, you know,
but not
maybe it
because of
was,
modernization. And so I think that like in some ways, like
well,
if you're saying, I mean, there's a whole lot of other reasons why the Roman Empire fell, but if you're like, oh man, like if we modernize things around here, that's going to change our tradition. Yeah, but that's how countries progress. So like you're ignoring progression itself. I think that heritage is like I think that what will destroy a heritage. I mean, certain like one of my whole points in this whole thing is that like some things you cast off. Some heritage is bad. We used to have oil lamps and fires in our houses until electricity was discovered. Now, maybe people had a tradition of setting the oil lamp on and reading by the oil lamp at night, but now they can just turn their lights on. So toss that thing in the past and forget that tradition, forget that heritage, forget that, progress. And so I think that the certain things you can hold on to, but like, oh, people lighting candles on their Christmas tree. Is that it? Oh, what we've done this for centuries. Yeah, but do you really want to light a candle on your Christmas tree on your tinder box of a Christmas tree inside your house? No, I'm just going to use an electric light bulb. It honors that tradition, but without being stupid. And so I think that that is so important. I think that some of the last thing you mentioned, I will talk about that. Is I think that globalization is a destroyer of local heritage. Anywhere you go, if we go into if somebody from another country and another culture goes into a different country with a different culture and they don't adopt that culture, then and they start growing in that area, then that area will become whatever mix of those two cultures there is. So I mean, I don't understand. People try to make it like a race issue because heritage is very closely related to race, because traditionally people are from different parts of the world and there are different races around the world. And so there's different cultures. You go to Chinatown in San Francisco and you're going to get a different vibe than when you go to the Jewish part of New York.
I just I just saw and I've seen this before, but it was pictures from like 1970s Iran,
Mhm.
and it's like, it's like a metropolis. It looks like the 70s in the United States, and
Yeah.
mini skirts and just very like modernized. And then I think it was might have been the 80s or whatever, whenever they had Islamic takeover, and
Mhm.
the basically the national religion changed. And I mean, now look at it. It's a completely different country. I'm not saying it's worse off or whatever. I mean,
You want to
you can make your own opinions about that, but much more oppressive,
Yeah, look
you
at
know.
Detroit. Detroit used to be the shining beacon city on the hill for America. And look at
Yep.
it now. It's basically looked like it's gotten nuked. I mean, it's I think it's actually very recently it's starting to get better, but 10 years ago the thing was an absolute dump. And probably still is in many places. So I think that that is one of the things that is really tricky, is that when we have mass immigration of people that don't care about the country that they're moving to, they don't care to learn the language, they don't care to learn the traditions. And one thing I've seen this in the corporate world, very in the corporate world, it's more of a global thing. So, I mean, you've got a lot of people coming in who don't have American traditions, right? So, for example, I was in a team once, and I was working at Citibank, and the kind of head managing director over a department was like, "Yeah, we're doing this one tradition that we have is summer Fridays. So you could get like uh, 5 Fridays over the summer where you could take off at lunch. I mean, it was just kind of a small perk, right?
Yeah.
And then uh, this other guy came in. This guy from India came in. He said, "Oh, we're not doing that. That's not how we work." And so, changing culture, changing in value sets, and so I think, and then later, a Scottish woman took over as you know as the head of Citibank. And guess what? We're not. Guess what comes? We're not going to bank gun manufacturers because guns are evil. That's her tradition. Her tradition is that guns are evil. Guns are only should only be in the hands of the government. So she comes to America, running one of America's biggest banks, and then she has all these uh, policies and all these things she wants to implement. So that's what's frustrating. That is how um, our heritage gets eroded when we put people in charge who don't have our same value sets. I think that is the principal way. Or and I think that put these people in charge. That's one way. But then also these people that come to our country and they don't want to adopt how we live. They don't want to adopt. And maybe there's room for enhancements. I'm not so prideful to think that the way that I live is the absolute best way. And we've talked about good things in all kinds of cultures. But and hey, I lived in Mexico for 2 years. I love Mexican food. I love going to get Mexican food. Um, and I love that culture. I actually enjoy some of the Mexican dancing culture is really cool. They have some of their Mexican culture is a very rich culture,
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. Some lots of it it's influenced by the Spanish, and it's great. But when they come to America, I don't want to see you guys raising the Mexican flag up in America, and and they don't want to see that if I go to Mexico. They don't want to see. They want me to learn Spanish. They want me to adopt their stuff, and then add the good that I bring to their culture. So, uh, it's I, I think those are the points that I wanted to make against yours. But I had some other things that I wanted to kind of mention about that kind of casting off the bat. A few examples from history. So one is well, just want to briefly mention the mindset after World War II, the German people. How were they going to deal with this mindset of everybody being on board? Maybe not everybody was on board, but a lot of Germans were on board with what was going on, uh, and so after that, their national identity has really struggled for this national pride, and so I even was watching this one thing where there's like a 300-year-old church, and there's a old bell inside this church that was cast in like 1940 something, and it says Adolf Hitler and has a swastika on the bell. And some of the people are like, well, that's part of our heritage, just that's part of our legacy. Leave it up there. And other people are like, that has Adolf Hitler and it has a name on it, has a swastika, and tear that thing down. And that's and ask for to display a swastika or any Nazi memorabilia is illegal in Germany. And so it's just an interesting uh, kind of kind of what I want to say. It's an interesting example of that shame that some people will feel. There's one specific example that I think is really interesting. There's an in the country of India, there used to be a practice which was an old Hindu practice that was called sati. And essentially, what this practice was is that if a man died, his wife was to be burned alive, willingly or unwillingly, on top of his funeral pyre when they burned the body. And so the British colonized India in the 1800s, and they were like, mm-mm, let's not do this. And the people, they saw the government as abolishing this ancient Hindu rite, and it was interfering with their ancient rites and their ancient religion. And so for them, somebody was coming in and messing with their tradition. In my eyes, some things should be cast off if they are no longer serving you or they're outdated. And so one of the just to give you a sense of what this was like, I had a quote from one of the Westerners, Francos Bernier, who witnessed one of these events happening in the mid 1600s. And he described it with these words. This is a quote from him. At Lahore, I saw a most beautiful young widow sacrificed who could not, I think, have been more than 12 years of age. Well, that's another issue. The poor little creature appeared more dead than alive when she approached the dreadful pit. The agony of her mind cannot be described. She trembled and wept bitterly, but 3 or 4 of the Brahmins, assisted by an old woman who held her under the arm, forced her, the unwilling victim, towards the fatal spot, seated her on the wood, tied her hands and feet, lest she should run away. And in that situation, the innocent creature was burnt alive. So some guy married a 12-year-old girl. At least at his time of his death, she was 12 years old, which is pretty messed up. And then they burned her alive when he died. And I'm just like, that is so insane. Why would you have that tradition? And so uh, that was banned. And it was actually only, it was officially kind of banned by the government uh, in different stages, but in like 18, and it kind of fell out of use for
Culture.
years culture, but it was officially banned in like 1989. So there was an estimate that from the years 1943 to 1987, there was 30 reported cases of sati, and then even recently, there's been some cases of like women. It's actually illegal right now to promote or glorify or be part of sati, that doctrine or whatever, uh, that act. Even recently, some women have jumped on their husband's funeral fires, more as like a suicidal ritual. They don't know if it's suicide or if it's just like because of the bereavement or what, but that's a horrible legacy to have. And so, uh, things that don't serve you, cast off. The one I think about, I think about a really catchy song that I like the song, but it's called Family Tradition by Hank Williams Jr., right? You know the song, right?
Yep.
He talks about his dad, and he says, me and my dad are different people, and we got different kind of music, and I respect his kind of music. And he's like, anytime anybody asks me like what I'm doing, he says smoking and drinking and all this kind of stuff. This is just a family tradition of
Yeah.
mine.
Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Family tradition.
And so it's like, well, that family tradition is harming you, and you're passing on a legacy. You're creating a legacy which will become a tradition of being a degenerate. So, in that case, I think that there's, just kind of make the point that I think that the world is ever evolving, and even thoughts and things, even traditions, or 30, 20, like even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I remember when our dad was a kid, he said that he would went to Sullivan's Island, which is an island off the coast of South Carolina. It's a beach right near Charleston. And he said that when he was a kid, they would stop you when you entered the island, and they would check to make sure there were no black people in the car. And if there weren't, then they'll let you go in. Black people weren't allowed on the island. And that wasn't that long ago. That was in our parents' lifetime. And so I think that, and there can be, so there's a lot of traditions that we can cast off, that say, hey, this is no longer serving me. Or this is not who I want to be. And I'm going to change it, or I'm going to keep these things, and I'm going to go forward, or transform it, or dump it all together. So one tradition that's kind of a funny little one that I feel like I'm just going to dump all together is there's an old tradition in the South that when General Sherman came through, he burned all the crops. His march to the sea from Atlanta all the way to Savannah, and he left behind the black eyed peas, because he thought that this is animal food. What, this is no, people aren't going to eat this, but that was all he left. So the people of the South that were in his path of his destruction, they ate black eyed peas that New Year's, and it's kind of developed into like a tradition. Even our mom still makes black eyed peas as kind of that tradition, or Southern heritage, where it's kind of good luck for the new year. I don't like black eyed peas very much, and so perhaps I can honor those folks in a different way. But yeah, maybe that's one I'll just dump.
Part of your heritage you wouldn't mind forgetting.
But I think that there's a question, is like, when do you dump when do you let go of a tradition? And I think when you feel like it's a drag or when it's no longer serving you, and you feel like it's not aligned with the values that you have, I think at that point is when you need to reevaluate the tradition, wonder, and then maybe find an alternative way to honor those people or to stop doing it altogether. And so I thought that was a really good advice that I was kind of thinking about and reading on creating your own traditions.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. And I think the aspect of you know, being willing to leave old things behind that maybe are irrelevant or outdated or maybe downright not right.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to adopt new things that will enhance maybe your true core values. Um, Definitely is something that's, yeah, definitely important. So,
Yeah.
listeners out there, this has been great. We'd love to hear what excuse me, what heritage were you left? What was the someone else's, your ancestors' legacy that you are now receiving as your heritage? And then what legacy do you want to leave that will one day become your descendants' heritage? I think sometimes we just think that, oh, we won't have much effect on what happens in the future, but we do. I mean, that's kind of the goal of our podcast is inspiring fathers to build the blueprint for the next generation. We want to leave a legacy, something that is impactful and meaningful, something that will better the lives of the generations that come after us.
Yep. So that when then our kids take that blueprint and they start to build their own lives, and they can say, "Oh, I'm actually building in the house now." They're building themselves. They're building their own legacy, and they can say, "I like this aspect. I like this aspect," and they can build the house to um, how they want it to be. So we're not building the house for them, but we're building a blueprint that they can follow if they choose to. So, uh, excellent, great discussion topic today. And like Ethan said, let us know what you think. Let us know what your heritage is. Let us know what your new legacy will be. We'd love to hear about it. And with that, let's build our creed together.
All right, let's do it.